Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Ultiworld senior editor Keith Rayner. It's college preview time. The college preview episode that you've been waiting for is finally here as we get ready to start this 2024 season in earnest. We've got live streaming coverage coming your way, multiple games per round from the Santa Barbara Invite, and then we've got to stream every round from the Carolina Kickoff on the opposite coast as we get ready to see some of these top teams take the field. Keith, I am pumped.
We are in college season. There were college games this past weekend. Shout out to UNC Pleiades and Georgia State Underground for their various successes. The couple of tournaments that have happened, but this is when we really start to kick things off. You know, that was the amuse bouche.
So Keith, before we get into it, I just have to ask you: is Brock Purdy elite?
I mean, if the bar is Joe Flacco, then yes. Then yes.
My 49ers are hanging in there, Keith. It was not a
he did not look good last
Green
week.
Bay Packers. No, it looked terrible.
No, but you know, even the best have off games. So
it was raining. I think that really explains a lot.
And no Debo
slipping, timing was all messed up. Debo got hurt. We still found a way to win. I don't really know how, but shout out to Purdy and Kittle for getting the job done down the stretch. Okay.
And Jordan Love for trying to throw 60 yards across his body.
Well, at the very end, but yeah, he's impressive. He reminds me a lot of Brock Purdy. Very accurate thrower, pretty comfortable in the pocket. He just made some like real rookie mistakes in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, the first year as a starting quarterback, first time there. Yeah, that's explainable. We always to bring it back to Deep Look, we always say that you got to get there and fail first before you get there and succeed.
I feel bad having to root for the favorite and the team that nobody wants to see win this weekend. Literally everyone is going to root for the Detroit Lions, and I understand, but I still just have to root against them. I don't feel good about it, but I have to do it.
I get why they're the team du jour, but yeah, I was hoping that the Rams or the Texans would get through. So my money, my financial stake is behind the Baltimore Ravens.
Oh, for the weekend or for the season? You got to win the Super Bowl?
For the playoffs.
So you have them to win the Super Bowl?
Basically, yes.
Okay.
I think that I would favor the 49ers to do so, but I like the odds on the Ravens better.
I mean, the Ravens kicked our butts, so there's definitely a chance that I think they're probably the team that I expect to win. Obviously, I hope the 49ers win, but we're gonna have to play a lot better than we did against them last time. We'll see what happens. As you mentioned, North Carolina, Pleiades coming out at the kickoff women's tournament, taking care of business. Nothing much to see. They win the final 7-2. They win all their games. I'm not really sure that I have much else to add about this. You feeling good about NC State, considering how dominant they were outside of those UNC games?
There's reason for there to be buzz on NC State. You know, our power rankings have them as the second best team in the AC, which I personally felt like it was a bit bold. Feel like we're taking some big steps for them. They did pick up LNU, who I believe was at Vanderbilt previously, but is a triangle area player and is going to be a big addition for them. So that could definitely be part of what's powering them. I think I'd still be surprised if they outgun Virginia by the time the season's over. But could the AC win 3 bids? That's possible. That's possible.
Georgia State wins the Starkville qualifiers. They don't really have any close games either. Not the strongest of tournaments, but they certainly take care of business. And I'll be interested to see how high this GSU team can go this year.
Yeah, rumor has it that they may have some nice visual elements attached to their kits this year. You know, a little logo of a podcast you might be familiar with.
Oh, no way. That's right. You had some Twitter beef with some kid on this team.
Well, we ended up with a bet, I think, on how they would do in a tournament last year, and they were trying to make quarterfinals. I can't remember if it's Midwest Throwdown or Huck Finn off the top of my head, but they failed to do so, and so their penance will be Rocking the Deep Look logo this
We need a
season.
compilation of other teams like with the Deep Look logo, like on the jersey, thumbs upping next to the Georgia State players. Send them in, folks. deeplook@ultiworld.com. All right. Well, let's dig into the key storylines from this year. This is a chance, like, if you're not really like up on College Ultimate and you're kind of just trying to check in and be like, what's going on with this season? What am I supposed to pay attention to? Why should I care? This is the show for you. We are going to talk about the big picture, like what to follow this year, how to follow. The good news is if you're trying to see what's going on, we're going to stream so much College Ultimate this year, more than ever before. So get yourself a standard or all access subscription and you'll be able to watch all these tournaments and keep up with the stories throughout the year. But Keith, I just want to start at the very top. Like, what do people need to know about the 2024 college season?
You can't talk about 2024 without mentioning the years that preceded it. Exactly 3 years. And of those 3 years, there's been but one school with the title, and that's the University of North Carolina, the University of National Champions, as it were. They are the defining bedrock of the college season right now. Can you beat UNC? That's not the requirement to have a good year for you to have a success story. At this point, you can go out there and not beat UNC and be considered having a great year. See Brown 2023 in the men's division. But that is, every team's going out there hoping to have their best year. And for the best teams in the division, the bar is trying to beat UNC. Everybody is chasing them. Can they pull off the four-peat? We are in an unheard of level of university dominance across divisions. This would launch them into, the best 4-year run of any college programs in history in 2 divisions simultaneously, which is a whole different stratosphere. So you're kind of chasing history if you're UNC, and you're chasing UNC if you're everybody else.
It's kind of unbelievable how this has happened. I mean, the ability to home grow as much talent as they have, and that's not to say they haven't brought in great players from outside of North Carolina, because they have, but we're mostly looking at players who have come up through the systems in North Carolina under the coaching tree of Mike DeNardis. And although he's not involved with the college programs anymore, and he's really just coaching the Flyers in the UFA, his fingerprints are everywhere, and like the amount of buy-in that they have been able to get to develop these teams at the point where not only have they won 3 years in a row, but they are still going into this season as the favorites in both divisions. That is just crazy. And it's not like they're not losing key players. Both teams are losing key players, but yet they have just done such an amazing job of refilling the pipeline and playing at an incredibly high level every single season. I mean, when's the last time UNC men's team missed the semis? It's been like almost a decade, which is just unbelievable.
And the women's team hasn't lost a game in like 2.5 calendar years.
We gotta have the website, haspleiadeslost.com. No,
we're doing it. If we're doing it. This is a real thing that's going to exist if it doesn't already before the show is published.
So they are the favorites, Keith. What are there reasons to doubt their dynastic abilities to go and win a 4th straight title this year?
Well, it's kind of the question you asked every year about this team is like, did they finally lose enough talent? Have they been able to replenish enough? Because every year they lose All-Americans, and you wonder, can they fill the coffers? Some of the most highest profile recruits in both divisions from the state of North Carolina have left to go elsewhere, and that still has not deterred these programs. But like you think that nothing lasts forever, even dynasties, even the greatest dynasties fall, right? So it'll happen one day. It's kind of just like, when will it? They're going to come in as the favorites this year. The crop of challengers looks very strong in both divisions. And this is going to get to another storyline I think we're going to talk about soon, is that there are a lot of top-level players back. And with the 6-year extensions, I think that has helped maintain UNC's dominance. They've been able to retain players for longer to keep a lot of institutional knowledge around. So I think that's helped them overall. But that's in part because they already had enough talent for it to be worth retaining. You know what I mean? So there are reasons to doubt, but like, how can you bet against them at this point?
Well, let's talk about some of the key players on each team. Conversation for Pleiades has to begin with Dawn Colton, who has just been an unbelievable player over the last really 2 seasons now. But is going to be probably the number one player in coming into this year in terms of expectations to win a Player of the Year award. She's, I think last year in our top 25 rankings, she came in at number 2 behind Abby Hecko. Many of the other players in the top 10 are back. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But, her athletic ability and just like clutch layout D impact has driven this team for a couple of seasons now. The question I have, Keith, is do we see more of her on the offensive line this year?
I think so. She's the best defender in the game right now. And to be clear, I think that she's at a point where she's had the best college career in the history of the women's division. Like, what can you argue against at this point? And yes, she got an extra year to do it, but the results are the results. But I do think you're going to see a lot more of her on offense. You've already seen it at the club level, her become a more dangerous thrower, particularly throwing deep. So I don't think she's going to like push into the handler space a lot. I think she might handle around the red zone, or when she gets back there, like she's going to be comfortable. But I do think you're going to see her with a more expanded offensive role, where she is guiding the offensive line, especially without Alex Barnett and Ellie Young. They still have Teresa Yu, who I think is going to be kind of the driving force, the engine behind their offense. But I do think you're going to see Dawn on the offense. And I think this team is going to be able to generate other key defenders.
Of course, Dawn winning a Player of the Year award in 2022. She also won the Callahan. This past year, she actually fell to the second team All-American list. She was the first player on the second team, so just a spot out of making the first team. But she also finished second team All-Club, playing for Raleigh Phoenix. She's as big of a star as you've got in the college division. But it's not just her. You mentioned Erica Birdsong has also been really coming into her own in the last couple of, it feels like the last 6 months almost. And I think she could have a big breakout season for Pleiades.
Yeah, she's a definite threat to make the All-American team. I mean, she is that good right now. And I think hasn't necessarily, because her team's so good, and I think this is kind of what kept Dawn from making the first team last year, is it just their team is so good. So there's only so much to distribute as far as workload. And now I think Birdsong's going to get a big helping of hers. But just an absolutely dominant deep receiver, fantastic mark, has the ability to hurt you underneath if you're just going to try and back her. So I think she's going to be vital for them. And that's, I think, kind of the big three is really that Colton, Birdsong combo.
Well, I want to talk about how, and we'll stay in the women's division for now. We have an enormous number of returning top players. So when you look at last year's top 10 in our 2023 top 25 players vote, which included both Ultiworld staff as well as players in the division, 7 of the 10 are back. So you've got Khalil Phillips coming back for Colorado, Kennedy McCarthy back for Vermont, Stacey Gaskill back for Colorado, Madison Allen coming back for UNC. When you have this many players who are coming back, and that continues down the board, we are in for an extremely high level season. Like, the good teams from last year are basically bringing back almost all of their key players. I mean, UNC in a way maybe has lost the most relative to the other contenders, namely Vermont, Colorado, and UBC. So let's talk about those other championship contenders.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a tough decision between who should be 2, 3, and 4 amongst that group, which were all in the semifinals last year. But Colorado, the star power, they've got it. Khalil Phillips, Stacey Gaskill are both back. They are losing a good chunk of important players for that team. Losing Bailey Shigley among others. Like their depth is going to be a little more tested this year, but they also return a number of other U24 players like Emma Williamson or all American candidates like Abby Gillick. Like there's plenty in the coffers for Colorado. And I think that they had a case for number 2, but when you look at Vermont and what this team has brought in over these past couple seasons, plus the fact that it feels like they never graduate anybody. Like they're losing Sarah Von Depp, and that's basically it. Kennedy McCarthy, a threat to win Player of the Year this year. They've got Emily Posey. They've got Caroline Stone, who I think is in for a huge year. She looked awesome in the club season, in her limited reps in the club season. She was a rookie last year. I think she is going to be very, very, very good this year. So they return a lot, and they add an incredible recruiting class for what feels like the third year in a row. So Vermont is vaulting up into the number 2 spot after finally breaking through into semifinals last year.
They had arguably the top recruiting class of 2022 when they brought in Emily Posey, among others, including Mae Browning. And they, again, have arguably the deepest recruiting class in 2023. So, or I should say 2024. Ella Monahan is the biggest name, but Tatum Kabrilovich, Ann Posey, Emily's younger sister, these players are going to be instant impact players, and they get more players with like high-level YCC or U20 experience than pretty much any other team in the division. So the future is bright, but they still have their stars of now. They still have Kennedy McCarthy, who is going to be probably battling Don Colton for Player of the Year this year. So, I mean, do they have what it takes on the depth side of things to actually run with UNC? That will be the big question, but they are a deserving number 2 in the preseason.
Yeah, they're going to be exciting to watch. I think that their top end really probably can match up with UNC, and that's not something we've said about many teams before. And it will be a question of depth, but I think UNC might be a little thinner. They're going to have to dig a little deeper on UNC, and there's good UNC players we haven't mentioned. Worth noting, Kabrilovich out of the triangle area, so you're pulling talent away from you're right out of the hands of the backyard of your number 1 competition. So it's an intriguing thing to follow for Vermont scene. And the team that we haven't talked about yet in that top 4 is UBC. It's all, I will say, it's always a little bit harder to get a sense of exactly what their recruiting looks like, but you can always trust that it's good. They pretty much always bring in players who are steeped in the Team Canada environment. They bring back the dynamic duo of Madison Ogg and Mika Kurahashi. Helena Tremblay is in for a big year too. Anagadu's there. Like they're going to be good. They picked up a lot of experience. They seemed a little, the lights were too bright last year, but they could put that behind them. And we get to see them this weekend at Santa Barbara Invite. They never play this early.
That's how you know that this is their year, that they know that this is their chance. After last year, they get spanked in semis. They cannot even run with Colorado in that game, but they're getting their season started basically a month and a half before they usually do. They usually come to Stanford, and that starts their year in early March. So now they're going to be playing, end of January. And how does these early reps help them? Will help them get there? We still don't know much about their recruiting class, Keith. That's a kind of a question mark for them. Do they have any star impact rookies? I think we're going to get a look at that at SBI.
They almost always fill in with depth, and so I really, they're like kind of a factory up there. It's a conveyor belt. Those players just kind of move up the roster. So I do not worry about their recruiting.
Well, part of it is just like the excellent youth scene that is thriving in Vancouver and in British Columbia, and those players are funneling in to this team. Like this is the big university on the western half of Canada. So it's interesting in comparison, Vermont, where we have varsity high school programs, the only state in the US that has varsity high school programs. That's not really the story for Vermont's growth. I mean, there are some players from the area, like, the Posies coming from Maine, that have plugged into this team, but it's more imports than it is homegrown that's actually making the impact for the team's like recent success.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it like people like the skiing? Is it East Coast Colorado out there?
I don't know how all of a sudden Vermont is like doing this incredible amount of recruiting. Maybe it's like people want to go to school in the Northeast, and like remember when Dartmouth was good? Like they were getting tons of recruits, and now Dartmouth isn't good anymore. So maybe this too shall pass with Vermont, but at least for now, Vermont has a championship window that's going to be open for 2 to 3 seasons. We'll see if they can get to the top of the mountain this year.
Yeah, what if the whole varsity thing starts paying dividends, dividends too? Like,
man.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if we're at the precipice of a Vermont being a dynastic team.
All right. I want to talk men's here. A quick correction. I said that 7 of the top 10 women's top 25 players are back. It's 5 of 10. It's 7 of 10 in the men's side, but it's still 15 of the top 25 in the women's side. 18 of the top 25 players on the men's side are back. So UNC is the front runner. Keith, who are some of the players to watch on this year's UNC?
Well, they have a duo of players who I think are both capable of winning Player of the Year. And that's the combination of Ben Dameron and Rutledge Smith. 2 very different players in their approaches, but not so much in their production. I mean, these are do-it-all players. Maybe Rutledge is a little more offensively inclined and Dameron's a little more defensively inclined. Dameron is this fireball of a player and Rutledge Smith is a little more relaxed. But I mean, they have incredible chemistry. They know their system inside and out, and they are players who have been in these high leverage spots many, many times. They're extremely comfortable under pressure, and they're kind of the guiding pieces, I think, of this UNC team. But they have plenty of good players around them. A lot of returners from last year, like Dylan Hawkins. Everybody's talked about their big pickup they're getting Noah Kroom, or Krumi, actually might be how you pronounce that. But he was one of the top players at Ohio State. So he's coming over as a vet already with plenty of experience. See where he plugs in as kind of the new Dylan Hawkins. But they have a lot of experience. They have a great system. I mean, it's hard to see exactly what weak point they have going into this year.
Is the average person fully up to speed on how good Ben Dameron is? Because I still think maybe he's underrated relative to his level of play. So I'm telling you now, Ben Dameron is, I don't know if he's the front runner for Player of the Year, because he was 4th in our voting last year. Well, over Henry Ing and Jacques Nissen, who are ahead of him.
Oh yeah, I guess
that's
fair.
For me, Jacques is probably number 1, Dameron number 2, and Ing number 3 in my like preseason Pody rankings, like likelihood. Because Jacques is going to be such a high usage player and is going to be just doing everything. And Dameron is still feels more cog in the machine of a very deep UNC team.
He was first team all club, Ben Dameron. First team.
I know.
But you are right that like he can kind of chill for a lot of the year. And if he's not like, if maybe he's resting up after a big club season, maybe he's like taking it easy until the postseason. Then that could certainly open the door. And that Nissen and Ing are going to get high usage roles.
I mean, Dameron was one of the best players on the U20 team. Like, the list goes on for him. Who is the top challenger in your mind to this UNC team, Keith?
For me, I think you got to run it back with UMass. They bring back a lot of the core pieces from last year. Wyatt Kelman, Caleb McSweeney. They were surprisingly deep, I would say, last year. I think that by the time they got to nationals, they were running a much deeper rotation than I had anticipated. I think Luca Harwood is struggling a little bit with injury, but he is back. Like, he is still with the team. So I think that you'll expect him to hopefully be ready for the postseason run for them. But he was obviously a huge piece of what made them successful last year. I think Jonah Stang Osborne's taking a year off, so he's one of the only players who's not returning from last year's campaign. And so I think that you're going to see a more confident and really unified UMass team that's obviously got talent.
Worth noting that they have another amazing recruiting class as well. We keep an internal document of rookies. They have 3 5-stars. That is a big deal. To even get 1 5-star recruit can be really helpful. But their recruiting over the last 3 seasons has been unbelievable, and it has not slowed down. So the real question is, can they find that level of consistency necessary to run with a team like UNC? I mean, the discipline of these UNC teams, it's just so hard for for other teams to deal with. They can win all their games the whole season, and then they get to the semis or the finals and they play UNC and they lose 15-7. That's how good and well coached UNC is. They come at you with defense that you are just not prepared to deal with. And like the looks that have been there for you all year are not there. The windows are smaller. Your defender is 6 inches closer to you at all times. It's just like suffocating. So can UMass play through that? Because they're a much loosier, goosier team than UNC.
Yeah, and I do think that they though can juice some variance into the game. They can really attack with a deep ball, and maybe that could turn the tide in their favor. But they're not the only challenger in the field. I mean, this is a deep field this year in the men's division.
Yes, it certainly is. And I think, when you want to go down the board to a team that could take them out, I mean, we saw how close Brown was a year ago. They have 2 top 10 players in Nissen and Leo Gordon. We'll talk about them more a little bit later in the program. But, even though the team is not that deep, they have the pieces to do the thing that it takes to win a title, which is have an incredibly difficult to break offensive line. And Nissen and Gordon and the rest of that O-line can just go out there and score on anybody. I mean, they really had a chance to win that UNC game. There were very few breaks. UNC's defense was not able to stop those guys. And it really just came down to a couple of small mistakes. And they're going to be a year more experienced. They're going to have some guys who are like a little bit raw, stepping into bigger roles. And they have the look of the Brown team, to me, that won in 2019, led by Matt Hecht. And nobody thought that team was going to win. I shouldn't say nobody. They were a good team. They were a very good team with Matt Hecht and JR. But it didn't feel like they were going to be able to go and beat UNC. And then they did. On the back of amazing throwing from Matt Hecht, why can't Jacques Nissen do it the same way?
I think it's more about the guys whose names people don't know that on this team. Like, how many times can they go out there and get a break with Jacques Nissen or Leo Gordon not on the field? That to me is going to be the defining characteristic of Brown's level of success. That Jacques and Leo are going to get buckets. Like that's part of the deal. But who's going to be the Ned Dick? Who's going to be the Aziz Adiemi on this year's team? Like, do they have those guys? Is that Elliot Rosenberg? They need those players to be
Duke Orsello.
Be at that level. Yeah. I mean, they have guys who I think are capable of that. And that's why I think there's so much reason to be hyped about BMO this year.
And I think we've seen that their coaching staff and Jake Smart have been able to develop these like younger players, more newer players into, the D1 college championships level rotation, and that they can hang. I mean, that's what we saw in 2019. It's not like that team was like so stacked with players who went on to like illustrious club careers. We haven't heard about a lot of those guys again. Now, to be fair, Matt Hecht and John Randolph, I mean, they're truly elite, like at or above the level of Nissen and Gordon.
But they've had some solid recruits. Having Jason Tapper come in is a big difference maker for them. Like, those are the guys that they need to be ready to compete, because that's the difference maker for them. And you're right though that the coaching staff has done a great job. I think Brown is good guy Florida. You remember the Brody and Cole days where they had this. It was Brody and Cole get the disc every time. We have a couple other cutters whose names you might recognize, but otherwise everybody else's job is to go out there and muck it up so that Brody and Cole can come back and save the day. Brown does that, but in a nice way. Like,
they do pick up a 5-star recruit in Eli Chang. He played club with Scoop, which that's the team behind Dig, right?
Yeah, yes. Scoop and Dig, you get the relationship.
And he's played YCC. I think was a U20. That's how you get these 5-star recruits. So yeah, he was selected to the 2023 or 2024 juniors team. So he's playing on the team that will compete this summer at World Juniors in the UK. So keep an eye. Keep an eye. Nice to pick up on an impact rookie like that.
Especially when you're in search of depth.
Yes. How do we feel about Colorado across both divisions, Keith? I mean, this is a team that kind of feels like it underperformed slightly on the men's side last year. The women's team did very well, but couldn't get the job done in the end. But they have a lot of good players coming back for both of these rosters. Is this their last chance here in 2024 to try to win a title?
I don't know if I'd say it's their last chance, but it does feel like we could see them start taking a step back as they're kind of like their full power. They're like, feels like you're really a championship contender talent level starts to drop off a little bit with some of the graduations. I mean, these schools have been recruiting too well for them to fall off the map. Like, I think you're still going to see these teams compete for bracket runs and, be on the precipice quarters, semis, finals teams. You're still going to have your Emma Williamsons and your Abby Gillicks. Faye Burdick was great as a rookie last year for Colorado in the women's division. And then for Mama Bird, they had the best recruiting class in the country probably last year with Ryan Shigley and Nondaman Fink and Tucker Kalmus. And then this year, they're getting Tobias Brooks, who would be a 6-star recruit if he could get, if we gave out 6 stars, Tobias Brooks would be a 6-star. But they are starting to lose some of those guys. They lost Landisman. Next year, I think they're going to lose a few more players with, Calvin Stoughton and his class with Aylin Learned. I think some of those guys may be on the way out next year. So you may see both of these teams go from being like, okay, are these the number one foils to UNC, to being like, okay, can these teams make semis?
But I mean, you got to like their chances this year for both teams, right? I mean, with Tobias Brooks coming in for Colorado, he's not your typical rookie. Like, he is going to play probably on the O-line and probably be one of their top contributors literally as soon as he plays his first college game. Like, this is somebody who's playing at the highest end of club and UFA. I'm still not used to saying it, Keith.
You've done a great job. You're 2 for 2.
Thank you. And so I like Colorado's chances to be a tough out this year, but they don't really get a lot of guys besides him. Can they use this last couple of recruiting classes, which have been very good, with Ryan Shigley, Tucker Kalmus, Nanaman Fink last year coming in? Like, I feel like they're refilling the pipeline. It's a question of like, do they have it all together this year to make that run? Or do we have to wait to see this Tobias Brooks become a junior or senior before we really think about them as being back in the conversation?
Maybe, now that I think about it, the Mama Birds, the strength of last year's class, and then having Tobias Brooks this year could be like, shoving the rod in the windowsill to hold the window open. Like, it may open up for them to get more of the top level recruits that they need, because, last year's class, they had, they had someone like Zeke Thorson, Carter Hallstrom. These are players who maybe aren't like superstar. Like, we're probably not thinking about them making All-American teams, but they do fill out on, in your top sevens. And they're starting O-line, D-line players. So I think that maybe there's more longevity to where Mama Bird's position is right now. But I think that they're in a worse position currently than Quandary is. So maybe that balances out. It's hard not to think about how this team just didn't live up to the expectations last year, and an extra year for that rookie class to season themselves. Bringing in Brooks, like, I feel like they could be better than last year's team, if not should be better than last year's team. But
it's very possible.
That still could result in a quarterfinals exit. That may not make them a top 4 team.
It's going to be interesting to see. Like, did that sophomore class step up in a big way? And then Brooks is going to plug in and be awesome immediately. There's no question. On the women's side, Simone Perotti comes in, 5-star. They bring back the key duo of Gaskill and Phillips. And if they can be a little bit more disciplined, especially with their deep game, I don't see any reason they couldn't win a championship this year.
I mean, you can see one reason. One 3-letter reason they can't win a championship this year, but
sure.
Outside of that, yeah. I mean, this is a title quality team. Like, just looking at on paper, like, this is a team that you can envision with a gold medal in a vacuum. But I think that, Liana Bradley, Faye Burdick, Sierra Petrash, like players whose names maybe aren't as well known, are going to be defining for this team.
So let's talk a little bit further down the board. And by the way, we did an out the back subscriber bonus segment a week or two ago where we went deep on the top 25. So I would say, please go check that out. But let's talk about some of the surprises from a year ago and what we might see from them this year, Keith. Where do you feel like, some of the breakout stories of 2023, like in the men's division, you see Santa Cruz, for instance, maybe SUNY Binghamton on the women's side. What's their story in 2024?
Yeah, you wonder, are these teams going to be able to build on what they did last year, or will they be, it was a flash in the pan? Santa Cruz was like one of the biggest surprises that I can really remember in the college division, as far as like where they started and where we thought they'd start and where they'd end up. There was a little bit of buzz of them in the preseason, and then by the end of the year, they had times where they were like a top 10 team, which is pretty wild. They had a breakout year last year, but they do lose some of the key players that drove that year, last year's success. Aiden Curry, who was their superstar, like rock handler thrower, and Liam J, another key backfield player for them. Those are players that are graduating from this team. They did have a good recruiting class last year, although Salem Jones, who's was one of the biggest parts of that class, I think he's going to miss this whole season. So that could hurt them. They still have Toby Warren, who's another part of that recruiting class. I think he's going to be one of the key players on this team. I still think they're going to be good, but I think they're going to be borderline for nationals. I think that they're going to really have to compete with a strong Southwest crop to make nationals. And the Southwest, they never have enough bids. So somebody's going to be left out in the cold, and it could be UCSC, but last year's experience should benefit them greatly, having gotten to nationals.
And then where do we think regionally things stand? Do you have any takes, Keith, on how these regions are going to shake out this year? Big bids or few bids?
Well, the thing to me to watch is still the Southwest, especially in the women's division. Last year, UC San Diego kind of fell off, and nobody really stepped up in the Southwest. We're used to seeing, a UCLA, a Cal, somebody step up into that vacated spot. Are they going to respond this year? I mean, our power rankings have UC San Diego back in that top 15 range. We have UC Davis ranked. So I think you would think about UCLA and Cal as being teams that are just outside of that ranking picture. Can one of these teams step up? Can this region reclaim its dominance? You remember it used to be UCSD and UCSB and Stanford, and it was like, these are 3 top 10 teams. We feel like Stanford and Santa Barbara are going to be around that line. So it's going to be San Diego again that kind of defines that. But you had the depth, and they kind of fell off on both those points. So how will the Southwest look this year? Are they going to get 3 bids or 4 bids? And who's going to be the teams that are in that spot? That's one of the most interesting like regions among the national map landscape kind of storylines that I'm looking at. And then, also looking at New England again. How good can New England be? Men's division, they were really strong last year, but I think there's a thought that Tufts and Northeastern, we're not exactly sure that they can maintain the strength that they've had. There's a thought that Vermont might take a step back. So are we going to go from it being, probably the best region in the country to it being in the conversation with the Northwest, with the Southwest, with the AC? Are we going to see that step back?
I must say, I would enjoy a 2-bid Northeast. New England has 2 bids, and it's like, okay, well, UMass and Brown, but like that's going to be an incredibly uncomfortable and scary regionals if they only have 2 bids, because even though those teams, like you said, are not at the same level as UMass and Brown, or both top 5 teams coming into the season, Vermont still going to be capable of knocking one of those teams off. Northeastern, tough. These are still good programs. I would say 3 bids feels like the likely outcome for me. Like not quite what we saw last year, but if these teams outperform, is 5 bids impossible? I honestly don't think that it is.
Well, the thing about bids is they're in finite supply. So if New England's pulling 5, who's getting left out in the cold? Because that means probably that the Northwest, the AC, the Southwest, the South Central, like regions that I think are going to have teams that are right around that bid edge. Like those are going to be the regions that miss out. I think that the Northwest looks like they could be really deep again. I don't know exactly what the top end's going to look like. If we're going to see a resurgence from Washington, I've obviously hyped up UBC on the show, but I think that they're still going to have a pretty deep group around them. So, is it going to be the Northwest who suffers that ends up with 2 bids or something like that?
I think in the men's division,
that's what has to happen for the New England to get 5.
In the men's division, and 1 bid AC is very possible.
Wow.
I mean, right now, in our preseason power rankings, NC State is at 19, and they're the second highest ranked team in the AC behind UNC at number 1. 19, that's like bid bubble probably out, because like the Great Lakes team or the Metro East team will be pulling those bids below that number 20 line.
AC needs a breakout team. They need, with NC State, not exactly
South Carolina
at the top of its game. They need a South Carolina, a Wilmington to break out and be bid quality.
And I think on the balance, right, there's a lot of AC teams in the like 20 to 40 range typically. Yes. So can 1 or 2 of those teams step up into the bid window? I think it's possible, but it's certainly no guarantee. I do want to talk about.
We'll get a little AC preview at Carolina Kickoff. You're going to get a lot of AC action there.
Yes. Out west, BYU is at the 5 spot in the men's division and the 9 spot in the women's division. Just want to give them a little shout, as we don't talk about them too much because of their inability to compete deep into the postseason. But 2 top 10 quality programs and have only been getting better. Honestly, it feels like we underrank them every year in the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, big shout out, especially to the women's division club, which has just grown so much over these past few seasons and has kind of vaulted up into the elite echelon. And I think it's hard for them, even harder than the men's division team, because there are less tentpole events in the women's division for them to get a chance and like really go out and beat the elite competition down the stretch. I even think people kind of write it off when you're really good in, late January, early February. And they're both BYU teams are going to be at SBI. And if they go out there and do really well, I think it'll still kind of be written off by the time we come around to March. But the men's team, has other chances to kind of prove themselves. And the women's team maybe has fewer of those because there are just not as many big central women's tournaments where all the elite teams are. But they've looked really good. They haven't quite gotten to the point, the heights of the men's team yet. But it's taken them a little. It's taken them their chance to develop. I think the developmental windows have looked very similar, and it just feels like we've seen them get better and better every year. And I think that they'll be competitive again with top 10 teams.
Well, it's going to be a very exciting season. Again, if you want more analysis of teams across the top 25, check out our Out the Back segment from a couple weeks back that you get access to with any Ultiworld subscription at ultiworld.com/subscribe. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're talking Western Ultimate League roster drops, key additions, key departures from every team, and we've got our question of the week. Stay with us. Welcome back to Deep Look. Excited for the college season, but we've got a lot of other stuff going on as well. The Western Ultimate League has announced all of its teams' rosters for the upcoming season. We're not too far away from the start of the year, just a little over a month at this point. And we got some pretty significant changes to all of the rosters this season. Obviously, we're not going to be able to talk about every single player that's on these teams, but Keith, let's talk about some of the key additions and departures for each team.
Yeah, if you're looking for the true deep dive, you got to check out Double Overtime, who has already gone over these rosters in great detail, and I'm looking forward to the full season preview as we start to get a sense of what the season's actually going to take shape like. But overall, just my first impression is that there's more talent going into the league than exiting it, which is a good sign, assuming that you don't account for the fact that 2 teams are gone. Some of those players have popped up on other rosters, but obviously that's a component here. But yeah, I mean, the league is set up for an interesting year because the team that lost the most is Seattle. They lost the most players, a lot of good players, and yes, they're bringing in good other players, but they're really the only team with like a major change in continuity. Otherwise, most of the other teams are returning a lot of their top end players. You do lose a couple of good players from a bunch of these teams, including San Diego, another one of the top contenders. Utah has a little bit of turnover, but like for the most part, you're seeing a lot of players stick with their teams and new talent be brought in. So it's almost difficult to figure out like which of these roster changes is the most significant, like which team is going to get the most better. But it's easy to get attracted right away to Colorado, the second year team. They bring in Blaise Sevier, Bailey Shigley, Alicia Dixon, Ari Nelson. There's a lot of good players entering this team. They're keeping basically all of their top end players from last year. And they're going to have that kind of, I think, second year bump, that, all right, we got our feet wet. We have a sense of what's going on. Our coaching staff, our management knows what's going on. We're going to be a lot more comfortable this year. So I think you can see a big step forward for Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of really key handler types to kind of settle things down on the offensive side, and just an overall higher level of talent on this year's Alpenglow roster. I mean, we remember when this team was announced, it was like, wow, they could immediately become the best team in this league. But then they didn't sign any of the top players in Colorado. I mean, I don't want to say any, but it was not Molly Brown, right? But now they're picking up some players who are on Molly Brown, who are of that level of talent. And I think with the a little bit of a dip that we're going to see from Seattle, although, it's debatable. They have some nice additions over there as well. We can get to that. But I think that this Colorado team has a good chance to be a real title contender. Maybe still not quite deep enough. I mean, that would be the question mark.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the rosters. It makes it feel like the league could be fairly open this year. I think you might have to make San Diego the favorite. They do lose, arguably they lose a lot of talent. Like they lose Julia Salvacion, Blair Messner, Penny Wu. Like those are good players, and they lost some other players too. And they're bringing in Abby Schiltz from the practice squad last year, Meredith Bile. But they returned so much of their top end. And this team has been so driven by those top, 5 or 6 players. Having Dina Melik, Kale Heldon, Christian Bajunas, Alex Diaz, like that can do a lot of the work for you. So I wonder if San Diego is going to come in as the favorite given the changes to Seattle.
Well, I mean, they're the second best team last year. So with Seattle taking what appears to be a step back in terms of overall level, why not Super Bloom as the second best team? They're definitely a deeper team than Colorado. The top end, I think it's like a little bit closer to comparable now, but I don't know. Dina and Kayla, like, is there a better top 2 in the league?
For sure, no.
Yeah,
there's not.
So like with that at the head of your roster and good depth and like not brutal losses. Also, Abby Schiltz coming up from a practice player spot. I mean, she is really good. She'll be a starter. I agree. They're the odds-on favorite. Colorado, though, for me, is now in the conversation, whereas last year they were just I didn't even expect them to like have a chance to make the playoffs.
Well, we've talked a lot about like how this whole conversation is set up by Seattle, right? Seattle has lost 1 game in their time in the Western Ultimate League. And so now you're wondering like how much has this Seattle roster changed? It's a long list, so I can't like run down everybody, but like they're losing Abby Hecko. They're losing Jamie Erickson, was huge for them last year. Abby Abramovich, Lexi Garrity, Francis Geller. Like it's a long list. But this was by far the deepest team in the league. So can they afford to get thinner? And how much thinner are they getting? They're bringing in Nada Tremonte from Scandal, Greta Eisenbray from Oregon, Kate Lanier, Carly Campana, who just finished their first years with Riot, Carleton, big time college stars. Like they're still going to be good, and I really think it's going to come down to how are they able to leverage their talent? Because before they were just kind of able to out deep everybody. They just ran out line after line after line. And are they going to still be able to do that? And if they're not, are they going to be able to adjust to take advantage of their other strengths? They still have Sage Zersky and Alexa Kirkland and Caitlin Rowling, Sam Rodenberg, like Cheryl Sue. Still a lot of good players here. I think that you are not wild to still put them as the favorite. I would favor San Diego over them, but like this is by no means going to be a pushover. Assuming we're just going to assume for right now that people are going to be engaged and participating with every team.
Seattle is losing 3 of their top 4 goal scorers from a year ago and 2 of their top 3 block getters. That's hard to overcome. And I know they have great players who can slot in, but it's just like the changeover in roles is not easy to do in a short season. So while I think they will still be very competitive and they will be in the playoffs, they are not an overwhelming favorite like they were a year ago. They were, I mean, it was like no question they were going to win the league last year. And that's not the case.
Yeah, so you really have a bit of open season, like I mentioned.
But we'll see. I mean, they have a lot of really good young talent, and if those players step up in a big way, I mean, they could go back to back.
Definitely. Like I said, I think that they're probably to be the second favorite in the league.
Sure.
Now the Wild, can we just stop to appreciate? If you've been paying attention, you've heard about this. This is like one of the best roster graphics I've ever seen. The Utah Wild roster graphic. You definitely should check it out if you haven't seen it. We'll have it up here.
Up on the YouTube. I mean, it's the ski map.
Yeah, ski map, and then the routes are color coded, just like a real ski map would be, based on whether a player's returning or first year or practice player. And then at the peaks, you have the coaching staff and the management staff. So good. It conveys all the information. It's relevant. It looks good. It's clean.
Yeah, the green ones are the practice players. The blues are the first year players, and the blacks are the returners. I mean, it's just it's put it in the museum.
It's perfection. It's perfection. Now, as far as the content itself, like what's actually coming out of this, they had perhaps the flashiest addition in the entire league this year was Stacey Gaskell coming in. There was a lot of hype about it. It's justified. Stacey Gaskell is a big difference maker. I hope that she gets lots of defensive reps so you can check out her incredible pulls. She's also obviously a great defender. They do lose some key players. They lose Corey Bigham and Molly Robbins, Jen Carburn, Madeline Hunter. Like these are all players who are basically in their starting rotation. Corey Bigham and Molly Robbins were 2 of their most important offensive players for their offensive and D-line respectively. And so that they have some holes to fill. And last year was not the best year for that team. So I'm not quite ready to buy in on like, okay, let's go all in on this team, even if I like the talent. But they're in an interesting spot. Like you definitely could see how they could take a step forward, but there's not going to be a lot of easy buckets in the league this year.
I mean, for me, it's really like, can Stacey Gaskell be enough of a big addition and play enough games that she can make the difference for a team that felt a little outgunned at times from just a talent standpoint? Because, there's a lot of good players on the roster, but it just felt like they didn't always have the answers against the deeper teams. And they just don't have the like top level players that other teams do. Stacey Gaskell will immediately be one of the top 5 players in the league. So can she make that impact? And will she play enough? I mean, Stacey often doesn't play large chunks of the Colorado season. So I don't know what we're going to see from her, but I hope that she plays every game and that and she could be the piece that helps them get to the playoffs.
All right. So the last remaining roster changes, San Francisco and Arizona. Arizona picking up Maggie O'Connor. That's the big call up for them. They're also bringing back LP Aragon from 2 years ago. There's just a lot of firepower to bring into the backfield. They're not losing a ton. I think you could make a compelling case that the Sidewinders are even higher than just championship weekend team, like that they could be in the finals. I don't think that's unrealistic. San Francisco, they're a little bit in the Seattle zone, just not as big, but good talent coming in, good talent leaving. So I don't know if it's quite a wash, but they're picking up Khalees Cardenas, Kanari Yamanishi, Margot Erheim, Sharon Lynn's back, Con Chen's back from a year off for each of them. But they're also moving Melina Wiebe and Jacqueline Wataoka to practice roles. Camille Flowerman is no longer coming back. So I do think that like it's not unusual for teams to move these practice players back into roster spots So there's a chance that'll happen for any of these teams. Something to keep an eye on. But I think the Falcons, for them, it's a lot about getting people to come out for more consistently. Melina Weeby played 3 games last year, and she was one of the best players on the team. So, can they get the buy-in from these players this year? They need to be difference makers, because you still can get excited. I remember thinking that this team could have won the league in their first year. I was all hyped on them in the first year of the league, and they kind of bottomed out. That better year last year, so I don't know exactly what to expect from them this year.
Until a team shows me they care and they show up and they come to the games, I don't believe in them. And that's how I feel about this team. I don't care how good your players are. You have to actually care. And they have not cared at all. So show me you care, and then we can talk. So we'll see what happens. But I like Arizona because they care. They care a lot. I mean, that's the most bought-in team in like all of Pro Ultimate. And they punch above their weight class as a result. I love the pickups. I think having some more like steady handler play is actually like a pretty key deal for them, because they have amazing cutters and they've just been very inconsistent with their throwers over the last few years. Like, do not be surprised if adding Maggie O'Connor makes a pretty big impact for their O-line efficiency. They could make the playoffs. People are going to be like kind of counting them out, but I like this team.
Yeah, I also like them as a sneaky pick. It's just a question of like, when you already have some teams that you feel like are pretty locked into the top, who is moving up? Like if we think San Diego and Seattle are probably like still favorites to make championship weekend, which of these other teams do you latch onto? That's the hard part. And we don't have to quite get into picks yet, but start playing your flags.
I mean, they have to do one thing. They have to do one thing. They have to beat the Bay Area. Can they beat the Bay Area? I say yes.
Oh my God. That's such a toss up to be between those two teams.
That's all they have to do. There's 3 teams in the conferences. You got to be top 2 to make the playoffs.
I got to look more at the schedule and see who, cause every team, there's one team you don't play. So like, if one of them has to play San Diego and the other doesn't, I'm going to start. I guess they're in a division with San Diego. So if one of them has to play Seattle and the other doesn't, that might be a difference maker for me.
Well, we'll take a look at the schedule and make our full set of picks when we get a little closer to the season. Okay, before we wrap up today, we have our question of the week. Keith, what do we got?
Well, this one inspired quite a bit of conversation in our Discord. And this question actually comes in from our own Pat Stegenmiller. He asked, would you rather have Jacques Nissen and Leo Gordon or John Stubbs and Mark Vandenberg? So these are Ivy League duos that have led their team to unreasonable postseason success without a ton of depth around them. Which duo do you like better?
Well, I put this in the Discord already, but I'll expand on my thoughts. I think from a like overall talent standpoint, I have to take Jacques and Leo. I think the game has progressed a lot since it was Stubbs and Vandenberg show. What year was that? Was that 17?
That was Raleigh, right? So yeah, 2017, is that right?
I think so.
Eons ago.
It's been 7 years. And I think that the overall skill of those two is higher than what we saw from Stubbs and Vandenberg. I mean, as great a player as John Stubbs is, I think Jacques Nissen has a higher ceiling as like a club level player and is, clearly just like, it's like playing with his food in the college division. I mean, he just is, it truly is not stopped by any team. Like they basically almost took out a much, much better UNC team than the one that, to be fair, Stubbs and Vandenberg did knock out in the semis back at College Nationals to get to the final where they lost to Minnesota. The thing is, I got to give credit particularly to John Stubbs, who went so beast mode in that semifinal against UNC. He literally scored or assisted every goal in the first half. And, there's not enough talk about how there actually were other good players on that Harvard roster. But I think that the current Brown team is probably less deep than last year's Brown team is less deep than the Harvard team that made the final. But I think this year's Brown team You think no way?
I can't back that. No, I think that the Harvard team was really thin.
Let me pull up. I'm going to pull up their
They had
roster.
like David Reschiff and they had the big man. They had the one tall guy. Like those are players who've had a little bit of club notoriety, but like that's it. Like I think that this Brown team has not only better players around them, but also a much more well-defined, well-structured system. And they have years of like all these guys in their team have been playing at nationals deep in bracket play. Even the guys who are just the role players, they have an expectation, a team structure of being a national level championship contending team. That Harvard team did not. They were coming out of the woodwork. Like they had to figure out how to compete against elite nationals competition.
And they went 2-2
for 2
in
years.
pool play. They went 2-2 in pool play. And then they won their pre-quarter against Oregon, beat Georgia by 1 in quarters. And then beat UNC by 2 before losing to Minnesota. Okay, but hang on a second. Let's look at this. You haven't mentioned one of the key names, which was Will Dean still on this team, or was he not on the team that year? Oh my gosh, he wasn't even on the team. He was coaching. So I take it back. I was going to say Will Dean. You can't forget about Will Dean. Aaron Santo, good player. Milan Ravenel, good player. But you know what? Now that I'm actually looking at the roster, I think I maybe agree.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly it was crazy. Like their stats at nationals. Oh, Alex Hem, he was pretty good.
Alex Hem, that's the big man. That's the big man I was thinking of.
Stubbs had 26 goals, Reschiff 19 goals, Hem 13 goals, Vandenberg 10 goals, Ben Sharfstein 8. Assist department, Vandenberg 30, John Stubbs 26, and Ben Sharfstein 10. So Ben Sharfstein maybe their third best player on that roster. And Alex Hem, but then like it was a really big drop off after those top 4. Anyway, back to the question. I would still take Jacques and Leo as like a pure skill duo, but I think the clutch factor of John Stubbs cannot be overstated. He was a beast, and like they had to go from losing 2 games in pool play, and they made the final. That does not happen. We don't see teams from pre-quarters make the final. Very rare.
Yeah, I mean, if like era adjust, I gotta put an era adjustment here because I do think that the game's just advanced already, and so I would take Gordon and Nissen straight up. But like if you port them back into that time period and have them develop, then obviously it's fraught with error trying to figure out exactly how that works. But that's the nature of comparing people who didn't play each other at the same time. I think like that's how I want to have that conversation because like I would easily take Gordon and Nissen just like straight up. I think I like Stubbs and Vandenberg. I feel like Stubbs is the best downfield player out of like this is the most versatile downfield player out of the 4 of them. Like that makes me want to take Stubbs and Vandenberg, but I don't know. I think Mark Vandenberg's the 4th player out of this list. So I think I'd actually land on Nissen and Gordon when all said and done.
Okay, I want to do some stat looking real quick because just to follow up on this since it's the question of the week. So first of all, are we underrating Mark Vandenberg? Because he was a truly elite college handler. Now, I know he didn't go on to great things in the club division. Right. But like, does he even play anymore? I genuinely do not know the answer.
No, I don't think he does. He played like 2 years with Truck Stop or something like that.
So, I mean, I just think he's a very different player than Jacques Nissen. He was kind of like more of that hubby type handler who just doesn't turn it over that much. But like, it's hard to be a great handler when you're like playing with one cutter. Yeah, like their O-line was okay. It was okay, but like without John Stubbs, this team is blanked in pool play. And I think without Vandenberg, this team might be blanked in pool play. Like there were lean years
for sure
for just when it was Stubbs by himself on this Harvard team. Like they stunk. So I'm pulling up Brown stats. By the way, Brown went 2-2 in pool play this year. They lost to Utah State.
Yeah, if they didn't
That was
come around
crazy.
and have that crazy UNC game like this, we would remember last year's Brown team so differently.
All right, so here we go. Leo Gordon, 9 goals, 22 assists, 3 blocks on 8 turnovers. Jacques Nissen, 7 goals, 19 assists, 1 block on 12 turnovers. Okay, we go back. We take a look at Harvard. John Stubbs, 26 goals, 26 assists, 5 blocks, and 16 turnovers. Vandenberg, 10 goals, 30 assists, 10 blocks, and 17 turnovers. My God. I mean, more turns, but like the usage rate of those guys was just through the roof. And I think I saw somebody say, well, Nissen and Gordon are better defenders, but like, look at those stats. I mean, those guys were, Vandenberg and Stubbs were getting blocks way more than Nissen and Gordon, but that might reflect a level of reliance on those guys playing O and D and also playing a lot of defense on O points.
Yes, they I feel like they played a lot more than Jacques and Leo do, to be honest.
So anyway, I think I still come down and saying Nissen and Gordon from a skill perspective, but from like a, can you just do it all yourself and carry the squad on your back? I think you got to give credit to Vandenberg and Stubbs for actually getting it done and getting all the way to the final. Although the level of competition that Nissen and Gordon have had to play against is a lot higher.
Well, shout out to Pat for coming up with a pretty compelling, like, these duos feel like extremely comparable. Like, it's pretty hard to separate them. We're splitting hairs, I feel like.
We are. All right. Well, we're going to take a bunch more mailbag questions in our bonus segment out the back for our Ultiworld subscribers. So head over to ultiworld.com/subscribe. Get yourself a subscription starting at under $4 a month. And you can listen to all of our podcast bonus episodes, get exclusive article content, video, and a lot more. So again, go to ultiworld.com/subscribe. And we've got awesome mailbag questions this week. You want to preview a couple questions for us?
Oh, yeah. So we have a question about which quarterfinalist is the most likely to miss nationals this year.
Ooh.
Last year's quarterfinalist group. That'll be a fun one to think about. So if you want to find out who we think is going to, we may even want to flip that question around. Who didn't make nationals and could make quarters? Ooh, we could do both. So there's some good stuff to talk about in sub bonus.
All right. That is going to do it for this edition of Deep Look. Thank you so much for tuning in. We begin our live episodes on YouTube every week on Tuesdays in 2 weeks. So set your calendars, get ready to roll as we will get things started. And noon Eastern Tuesdays, beginning on February 6th. We look forward to seeing you there. Next week, we'll still be on our pre-recorded shows, and then we'll kick things off in a new way as we get ready for the season to get underway here this coming weekend at SBI and kickoff.